I need to get something off my chest by sharing this story. I can't mention any names because I don't want anyone accusing me of anything. I don't consider myself guilty, but I feel the world needs to know about the evil we faced, or that was stalking us. What I lost that day has never been recoverable, no matter how much I begged God. That was my punishment for being so impulsive with my wild ideas. In the end, I paid a very high price, and the worst part was that I wasn't alone. At the time I was 21, the same age as my best friend, and we were both on university break. It's worth mentioning that we were both fascinated by the paranormal, and by this point, we had already tried some well-known games, though none of them met our expectations. Then I had an idea. If we wanted to try the Ouija board, we had to do it in a place with a strong connection to the afterlife. I thought about a cemetery, then a church, but eventually I settled on a funeral home where there was a body. My best friend agreed. I was lucky enough to know the girl who ran the place, and I managed to convince her to go to the movies with me. My goal was to steal the keys to the funeral home, and I succeeded when she had a moment of distraction. When I met with my best friend again, the excitement took over us. We really wanted to do this and see if we could make contact with any spirits from the other side. The adrenaline coursed through my body, and I couldn't wait. Thanks to the girl who managed the place, I knew when the funeral home would be empty, so we sneaked in. That night, we found the recently prepared body and sat next to it on the floor. We took out the Ouija board. My hands were trembling from excitement, and I loved that feeling. Then we began the game. We had a paper and pen to write down each letter, and through our questions we confirmed that we were not only in the presence of one entity from the beyond, but several. We were beyond excited until one of them spelled out that the body was dead, but the spirits lingering around were not. That felt like a very real threat, but the excitement outweighed the fear, so we kept going. As we continued, I began to feel the need to stop. We had already confirmed the existence of these entities, and we'd made contact. There was nothing more for us, but then an entity asked which one of us wanted to be buried in the back of the funeral home. The excitement suddenly vanished, and we looked at each other, terrified. One of the lights exploded, and we were left with only the moonlight coming through the window. That's when we decided it was time to leave. We had no idea that the worst night of our lives was only just beginning. Something invisible started hitting us and pushing us as we neared the stairs. When we were almost there, something grabbed my foot, knocked me down, and dragged me back to the room where the body was. My best friend came back for me, helped me up, and we ran back toward the stairs. This time we managed to get to the first floor, but we were disoriented. The place was pretty big, and we didn't know which door we had entered through. On top of that, we started hearing laughter from the second floor, even a woman's voice telling us we shouldn't forget the board. Seconds later, the board fell from the ceiling at our feet. We ran around trying to find an exit, but it was all in vain. In the end, just like they grabbed me, they grabbed my best friend and dragged him to the back. I tried to follow, but once he was outside, the door slammed shut, and I couldn't open it. I went to the window and watched as he was dragged and slammed against the walls. Seconds later, the board landed at my feet, and a phrase began to form on it. I read it with utter shock. The phrase that appeared on the board was, "He is here." After that, all the paranormal activity stopped. The doors opened, and my friend came out, terrified and shaking. I kicked the board and we ran out of there while a horrible breathing sound followed us, like something huge. Thank God, we made it out of that place and never spoke of it again. We simply tried to forget what we had experienced and hoped nothing bad would happen from that night onward. I can't say I haven't had frequent nightmares since then, waking up crying because I can see a very dark, gloomy place filled with screams, and I feel a burning in my chest from how depressing it is. I think ever since that night, I've been able to see hell in my nightmares, and it watches me from then on. My name is Gabriel, and as you may have heard in some of your previous videos, by now people should know that sometimes we are born with a special gift, as if God himself had touched us. Some people can see the future and develop this ability, calling it clairvoyance. Others can heal without any knowledge of medicine, a skill widely known among shamans, the same one that made Pachita famous here in Mexico. However, my ability is a bit more peculiar. I am able to have a normal, casual conversation with corpses before their souls ascend to heaven. Now I want to share the story of why I gave that up. At that time, I worked at a funeral home, and things were going quite well. Sometimes I would prepare the bodies, and other times I would handle the arrangements. My salary was modest, but the director would increase it whenever I showed that having me there was profitable. Many people knew I could communicate with the dead, and they would ask me to inquire about unresolved matters left by the deceased. I never let them down. Let me explain a little about my gift because I know it's quite intriguing. Once I'm in the presence of a corpse, all I need to do is ask a question, and the body opens its eyes and responds. Very rarely do they sit up or stand, but this is where it gets interesting. Only I can see and hear this happening, while my eyes show me and allow me to hear the body sitting on the gurney. To others, the corpse remains lying down, silent. Of course, it's obvious that I can hear them, but my colleagues wouldn't fully understand the conversation. At first, they didn't believe me, but over time I found ways to convince them. The joy on people's faces when I fulfilled their requests was clear proof that I could make contact with souls before they departed for heaven. But here's where I must confess that not all of them went there. I don't usually talk to all the corpses, only a few. However, the ones who didn't go to heaven were the ones who spoke to me without me asking. I would always notice them, downcast, sad, and sometimes angry. Despite having this gift, I still had many doubts about how things worked, or at least I didn't understand the limits. There were corpses that moved tables, chairs, and everything else, and my colleagues could see and feel that, on one occasion, the director was struck on the head with one of the surgical tools. That's why they would leave me alone with the body for half an hour. If I sensed no hostility, or if the body didn't speak to me, my colleague would come in to assist in preparing it. I can't deny that some of them terrified me, but nothing compared to the one that came to change everything. It was 12 p.m. when we were notified of a new body's arrival. We had 2 days to prepare it for the wake, more time than usual, but we didn't question it. I felt an urgent pull to check on the body right away, as if it was calling me for something important. It was a teenager who took his own life due to depression. Cases like these made me reflect deeply. He must have suffered so much to make such a terrible decision, but I never dared to question it because everyone has their own struggles. While alone with the body, I whispered that I was sorry for what happened and waited for a response. My gift had never failed me before, but this time the body didn't respond or even open its eyes. In fact, it didn't move at all. My heart raced and my mind went blank. I had no explanation for what was happening. I asked again, but still no answer. That's when my colleague arrived to tell me we would be doing some touch-ups on the body and that we would have it ready the next day. That's what we did. And during the process, he asked if the body had said anything to me. I replied no, and that was all I said because I didn't want to talk about it. My facial expression spoke for me. The next night, when it was time to prepare the body for the wake, my colleague called me to say he couldn't make it and asked me to cover for him. I didn't mind because I often made similar requests. I got dressed and started preparing the body, but 2 hours later the body opened its eyes and stared at me. I jumped back, almost falling and knocking over the table behind me. The body sat up, never taking its gaze off me. I was speechless, and then it spoke. It told me to give up my gift, because evil had noticed what I was doing, and soon it would either corrupt or harm me. I remained composed and told it not to worry, but it insisted, revealing that its death hadn't been a suicide, but was caused by a powerful demon, which no one had noticed possessing him. This intrigued me because possession in humans leaves many signs, but I stuck to my belief that there was nothing to fear. That's when I witnessed the most paranormal activity of my life. Tables began moving, tools flew through the air, and I heard a chorus of voices telling me to run or else they would end my life. The corpse itself told me to leave and that I would be safe. From that point on, I resigned myself to never using my gift again. I had no choice but to run out of the funeral home and go home. When I returned in the morning, I was surprised to see that the body had already been prepared. Someone else had finished the work, but I never asked who. I cleaned up the mess on the floor, and when my boss arrived, everything was ready. The wake was held, and afterward I announced that I would never use my gift again. I preferred to stay alive. From that moment on, I never heard from another dead soul. I'm about to share a story that left me with more questions than I've ever had in my entire life. It was something so mysterious that to this day, no one has been able to explain it. I'm aware that there are many mysteries in the world, and evil manifests in ways that humans still can't understand, but what I saw was completely macabre. I was one of 2 people in charge of preparing bodies at a funeral home for their respective wakes, especially when families decided against cremating the body to keep the ashes. My colleague was, I must admit, much more skilled than I was. She would often give me advice to improve, as I had only been working there for about 8 months. I frequently asked her if she had ever had any encounters with the paranormal, and she told me that while she had experienced certain things, she wasn't sure how to categorize them. She made it clear that working at a funeral home meant being in close proximity to the souls of those who had passed, so it was impossible to work there for long without feeling or seeing something that didn't belong to this world. At least, we agreed on that. In a way, we were close to the boundary that separated the world of the living from that of the dead. I always kept my faith in God, trusting that He would protect me from all the evil in the world, or at least the evil that surrounded me. Honestly, I didn't worry much about those things. I made sure to be respectful to the bodies and attended the wakes to show my respect. It was on one such occasion that we didn't receive just any body, but that of someone I knew, someone with whom I had shared good times. I was stunned to learn of their death in such a manner. My colleague noticed what was going on and even told me that if I wanted, she could prepare the body alone without any trouble, but I refused. I needed to remain professional. I did what I could, but soon I told her I would accept her offer to cover me while I took some time to visit the family of my late friend. They had been very kind to me in the past, and I felt I needed to show some respect. I spoke with the family and expressed my condolences, but I didn't waste much time before asking how it had happened. Apparently, no one knew for sure. He just had a heart attack while sleeping, and that was it. I couldn't believe it. Not after knowing he had lived such a healthy life, exercised regularly, and wasn't even 30 years old. I also asked about his twin brother, as I didn't see him at the house, and the family said they hadn't seen him since my friend's death. This struck me as odd. It wasn't normal behavior. He should have at least been at home to support his mother. I wasn't a detective, but I had a lot of respect for my friend, and my curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't going to leave without trying to uncover the truth. The problem was, I didn't have any tools or clues, and the funeral home director asked for my help with the arrangements for the wake. In the end, all I could do was pray to God to have mercy on that poor soul and let it enter His kingdom. That same night, before the wake, I received a visit from a woman at the funeral home. She said she wanted to talk to me, so I went down to meet her. It wasn't a long visit. She was there just to tell me that evil would be present in the funeral home the following night, and that I should be very careful. That was even stranger. I didn't know this woman, and it was the first time I'd seen her. It was odd that she came to find me specifically to say that. I didn't understand her purpose. It felt like she was warning me about something, but I couldn't decipher it. The night of the wake came, and I attended, of course. I greeted my late friend's family and helped create a beautiful arrangement, better than what their budget could afford, all thanks to the director, as my colleague had spoken to him about the situation and helped with the gesture. While I was there, I saw my friend's twin brother for the first time. He was sitting apart from everyone, barely exchanging words with his family. My mind was telling me something was very wrong, but I couldn't play detective because we were in the funeral home. Doing so might jeopardize my job, and that was something I couldn't afford. Suddenly, he stood up and moved to a desolate part of the funeral home. I saw this as an opportunity to follow him and figure out what he was up to. When we were alone, I saw him from behind and asked if he was okay or needed help, but I started hearing murmurs, as if he was whispering to himself. I had no choice but to walk around him and look him in the face. That's when I was stunned. His eyes were completely white, with no pupils at all. He was talking to himself, saying that he had to do it, that he had no other choice but to give his brother's soul in order to save himself, or else something would come after him. I found it hard to believe he wasn't talking to me because he wasn't aware of my presence. It was as though he was in some sort of trance or something similar. I can't describe it any other way. Eventually, my boss called me, and I had to leave him there alone. When I tried to return, he was gone, and I had to go back to finish the wake with my colleagues. A few days later, I found out that my friend's twin brother had gone missing. No one knew where he was. The police conducted a search, but it was all in vain. They never found him. That was the last I heard about that case. I had many questions, but one thing was clear to me. My friend didn't die from a heart attack, not in a natural way. Only God knows the truth, that's all I can say. Since I was young, I was taught that one must do whatever it takes to move forward and succeed in life. I've always been ambitious, and those close to me can attest to that. However, I'm not proud of the time I spent working with funeral agents. Things weren't going well, and I had to resort to unethical and immoral actions to bring in good money for my family. For obvious reasons, I won't reveal my name, but I want you to know my story. As I mentioned before, I worked at a funeral home where I had a good relationship with my colleagues and the director. My role was very important, and a lot of responsibility fell on my shoulders. We were the only funeral home in the surrounding area, and like everything else, we had our ups and downs. One day I grew tired of things being that way. I wanted us to maintain a streak of good abundance, even if that meant that many people would have to die. Those less fortunate moments were what destroyed my plans to build a new hall so we could hold 2 wakes on the same night. I had handled the plans and everything was in place, but the director deemed it unprofitable given our current income. I realized then that I had to do something, or I would have to find another job and settle for a modest salary, or at least one comparable to this one. I had received offers from other funeral homes, but I had grown fond of this one, and the director because they were the first to help me. So I came up with a plan and ventured into the most dangerous part of the neighborhood, where the funeral home was located. At night, I sought to connect with people involved in organized crime, and I succeeded. I managed to catch their attention, and with all the fear in the world, I confidently told them that I had a proposal they would like. They looked at me with curiosity and agreed to listen to what I had to say. I told them I worked at a funeral home and that I needed sales to increase, meaning the number of deaths needed to go up as well. I offered them a modest commission for each death they brought to my funeral home, as long as the family came to us for the services. They had to figure out how to make it happen, but they agreed without hesitation. In just 1 week, 4 families came to us for services, and the hitmen provided proof that the deceased had come through their hands. I gave them the commission, and this marked the beginning of the best days for the funeral home. We were able to raise our prices, and people continued to choose us. I never spoke of my business to anyone, as I couldn't risk being exposed. I spent months working this way, and the director gave me all the credit, since it was I who approached the families who had recently lost a loved one and immediately turned them into clients. I was making a lot of money. Even though I paid the commission to the criminals, then came the day that changed everything. By then, we had built a new hall to hold 2 wakes at once, just as I had always proposed. That day, a messenger from my partners came to tell me that some colleagues had killed a young man, but this time, they didn't want to have anything to do with the body. They never explained why, but it struck me as strange. Before leaving, the messenger told me that the deceased's family would contact me and advised me to reject them. However, this was something we couldn't do. We had a reputation to uphold if we wanted to stay ahead of the competition. That same day, we received the call from the family, and I couldn't ignore them. I advised them and arranged everything as we had been doing. My mind was set on keeping 100% of the profit from this service. When the body was ready for the wake, we informed the family and the service was set for the next day. I stayed at the funeral home organizing things, but suddenly I felt a chilling discomfort, like I was being watched. It was something I had never felt at my job, where working with the deceased was an everyday task. But no matter how much I checked the rooms, I couldn't find anyone. Then I started seeing what looked like shadows moving from the corner of my eye. I began to wonder if it had anything to do with the body of the young man my partners refused to deal with. I went to see for myself. He was about 23 years old, nothing out of the ordinary. I finished preparing everything and left, but I recorded the face of the deceased. The next day at the wake, I was in for the biggest surprise of my life. The family was there, but at the back, by the last row of seats, I noticed a well-dressed young man hiding behind a column, his body only partially visible, watching the coffin. It caught my attention, so I approached him to talk. But when I got closer, I was shocked to discover that it was the same young man who was supposed to be dead. I thought I was hallucinating, or that it was someone who looked very similar, but it was him. At that moment, he hid behind the column and then disappeared completely. I hurried to the lobby, wondering what I had just seen when the boy's father came up behind me. He asked with curiosity and impatience if I had seen anything. I had no choice but to tell him what I thought I had seen. After I finished telling him, I watched his face for a reaction. Instead of crying or showing sadness, he broke into a huge smile, as if he had received great news. Without caring about my opinion, he began enthusiastically telling me that his son had succeeded. He had managed to deliver his soul after years of praying and performing black magic rituals to transcend and achieve eternal life in the astral plane. In this state, his son could now take revenge on those who had ended his life, sending them to eternal torment in hell. I had no words to respond after everything he said. I simply kept a shocked expression on my face, and he thanked me for having the confidence to share with him what I had seen. After that, he returned to the room with an entirely different attitude than before. I waited until the wake was over, hoping to forget what had happened. Curiously, after that, the criminals never contacted me again for our deal. Honestly, I'm relieved it ended, because who knows what happened to them. They probably aren't alive anymore, and if I had continued, I might have ended up the same way. And those were today's stories. Did you like any of them? Comment on which one you liked and tell us if you've ever experienced something like this in your life. Don't forget to like, and I hope to see you in the next video, if you have the courage to watch more stories.